Now, most people, when they introduce a video like this, would say something like, going from employee to self-employed contractor to business owner isn't easy. Classic cliche. And you might agree with them, but I would argue it's easier than spending your whole career working for the man and then at the end of your working life, looking back when it's too late, thinking, I should have done what I actually wanted to do, rather than putting everything into lining someone else's pockets who, at the end of the day, let's be honest, 9 times out of 10 don't really care about us, our family, or our futures. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my journey from being an unhappy employee to a much happier self-employed contractor and now business owner. And I haven't made it. I'm not a millionaire. I'm just what I think is a pretty average person who's been able to make that progression and done it in the only way possible for most average people, you know, without being born with a silver spoon in their mouth, without having rich parents, without having external investment, without having a mentor, and just working things out, you know, as they come, you know. And I'm going to share with you the path that I've taken up until today. But before we get into that journey, I think it's really important just to give you some context as to what drove me to get started in the first place and what my goals were back then. Because in my experience, unless you've got a strong reason as to why you're doing all of this, and then reminding yourself of this strong reason why as you make progress, you'll start to regress and you'll end up back to where you started in the same place that you wanted to move away from. And I'm telling you this because I've experienced it firsthand, and it's probably set me back about 2 years when I think about it. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you, and I want to give you that context now before we get into the journey that I took. Okay, so let me give you that context as to what drove me to get started ultimately, like doing my own thing, progressing from employee to contractor to now business owner. And ultimately, the thing that really drove me to get started was that I'd had enough of working for other people, organisations. So that was really the big driver for me. Like, there's 3 key things that stuck out when I was thinking about this. Is one of them being that I was just sick of all the brown nosing that would go on and backstabbing, certainly in larger businesses, just the politics and how this was allowed to flourish. And I just didn't see it as good business culture, and it just wasn't for me. I didn't fit into that. So that was one thing. I'd had enough of that. It also seemed like once I'd been working for enough different organisations, and don't get me wrong, not all the organisations that I've worked for have been bad, just to clear that up. I've had some really good experiences with some, but generally speaking, it seems that organisations, businesses, they just want employees to stay in their lane and do their job and shut up, and they don't really want people to progress, it seems, for whatever reason. You know, that's for another video. And then the final thing, key thing, it just seemed like I was working for or working with people who were incompetent. And I know that sounds really arrogant, and that makes me sound like I'm better than them, and I don't mean that in that way at all. When you're a person that's really interested in what they do, and you're passionate and you're ambitious, and you're working for or with or alongside other people that aren't the same as you, it drags you down. And I just felt like I was getting dragged down. And again, this doesn't apply to everyone that I've worked with and all the people that I've worked for and alongside. I'm speaking generally here, but that's what I found. So those were kind of the 3 drivers that got me started. Then my goal at the time, when was this? This was probably like, 6 to 9 years ago, depending on when you class my business journey. But my goal back then at the time was ultimately, I wanted to take full control over my life. And I felt at the time, giving up 8 to 12 hours of my day, Monday to Friday, I wasn't in control. I was on their time, basically. So I ultimately had to do what they told me to do. And I'm not a good person for authority either. Took me far too long to realise that. Should have looked at the clues when I was younger. So that was it really. Like, that was like the main goal for me, is I wanted to take full control, full responsibility for my life. What is it? We spend 1/3 of our lives working, 1/3 of our lives sleeping, and then the 1/3 is for play, recreation, whatever. So I didn't want 1/3 of my life being in the hands and control of someone else, basically. So that was kind of the big driver. The other thing was that I get bored very, very quickly and easily. And what I came to realize is the stress and the anxiety from starting to progress my own thing was far less stressful and anxiety invoking than being in a place, having learned everything after 6 months, and then basically twiddling my thumbs and being bored and not feeling challenged. And that was just, again, this just took me so long to realize, like, why did I feel anxious? Like, why did I feel stressed? And that was a big contributing factor to that, was I was just unchallenged. I was unfulfilled. And it was because of that, you know, what I started to realize that doing my own thing, although there's anxiety and stress involved with it, there's a lot of excitement. And then you can start switching that. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you experience anxiety and excitement, it's exactly the same physiological feeling. It's just we associate one with like fear and one with excitement, but it's the same thing. So what you see when you start doing your own thing is, of course there's stress and there's anxiety, but there's a lot, you associate that feeling with excitement a lot more. And the second point, and I've already touched on it, but I just had enough of doing tedious, mundane work day in, day out. And as I said, what I found is, like, after 6 months being at a place, I'd learned everything and that was it. And I was ready to do the next thing. I was ready to start moving on. But there was no opportunity to do that. That was it. So nothing new, nothing exciting to learn. And ultimately I didn't feel challenged and I felt very unfulfilled. And then the final thing, as to what my goal was back then, was that I wanted to start earning proper money. And I wanted to stop trading my time for money. I wanted to start to build an asset. You get to a certain point where the time that you do put in, you get a far bigger return, and you're not necessarily trading, labor time for cash. It's like a completely different dynamic. Of course, you're always trading your time for money in some respect. That's not entirely true, but you get my point. And so I wanted to stop trading my time for money, at the very, basic level, and basically build a business, build a profitable business, build an asset. So those were my goals at the time. Now, as things have moved on and progressed, like, goals and motivations have changed, and it's kind of natural in business. That's just what happens. So things are slightly different now in terms of where we're going and what we're doing, but it's still associated with this kind of stuff, I suppose. Okay, so now you've got some context as to why I started on this journey. And if you want to have a look at like how long I spent at each place and where I worked, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Chris Guyatt. So the first stage, pretty obvious, a full-time employee. And I did this from the age of 16 to about the age of 27. And that was working obviously Monday to Friday, pretty standard. And at 27, I started dabbling in business, like a little side hustle. And I started a little Amazon FBA business. So basically buying stuff from China, rebranding it, sending it into Amazon, and then selling it off Amazon. So I did that for 2-3 years, but it wasn't for me. The business model, going back to control, like Amazon is in full control. So I didn't like that. So I stopped doing that after a few years. I'm going to touch on money, not specific figures, but like what money looks like at each stage. And money, when you're an employee, is bad in comparison to other stages. Like, it's not bad, but it's bad in comparison to if you're doing your own thing, doing your own business and doing okay. Obviously, if you're running a bad business, then money might look bad too. But okay, so step 2, and this is where I was like a full-time employee and a part-time sole trader. So I set up as a sole trader at this point. And this was around the age of like 30, 31 to the age of like 32, 32 and a half, something like that. I'm not 100% sure on ages and years and stuff, but it was roughly about that. So at this point I was a full-time employee working Monday to Friday, and then a part-time sole trader doing private jobs, mostly doing like day rate stuff, Saturday, Sunday, and occasionally after work. And at this stage I started investing in some tools and laptop, that kind of thing. And the money was, I've put here meh. It was, no different really to being a full-time employee, but I was obviously putting more time in. So, it's pretty meh to start with. Okay, so moving on to the third step now, and this was where I was a part-time employee and a part-time sole trader. And this was between the ages of sort of 32, 33. I did this for about, 8 months to a year, something like that, where I negotiated with the business that I was working for at the time to go down to part-time work. So I worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for them, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday doing my own thing. And again, this was just doing private jobs, day rate stuff, no huge project work or anything like that. And money-wise, I put here as a note, was okay. It's starting to get a little bit better. And I'm taking control. I'm able to have more control over what I'm doing now. Time to spend where I choose to spend it. And then moving on to step 4. So at this stage, I went full-time self-employed contractor. But I stayed as a sole trader. I didn't set up a limited business at this stage. And this was for about a year, from the age of 33 to 34. And at this stage, I had enough of a client base built up. I had enough of a pot of savings where I felt secure. Like, I would never recommend to anyone to go into business full time, self-employed, unless they've got 6 months worth of comfortable living expenses, because you don't want to start on the wrong foot. You don't want to start in business from a place of desperation and fear, where you're desperate to get the next bit of work in so you can pay the mortgage and bills and put clothes on your kids. You're failing before you even get started. So you don't want to operate from a place of desperation, because people smell it and then they take advantage of it, and then it's just a vicious cycle then, and it's hard to get profitable. It's hard to get out of that state, basically. So I knew that. I read a very good book called Profit for Contractors just as I was moving into this phase. So I recommend reading Profit for Contractors. It's a great book. So yeah, I had this pot of money, 6 months of savings. I felt confident, I felt secure, I had a client base. At this stage, I had really, I would say not perfected, but I'd got far enough along in my technical ability, my understanding, where I felt confident. That's what it boils down to, is confidence, really. To sell my services and talk to clients from a place of really knowing how I can help them and how I can advise them, and ultimately help them make an informed decision, But around this time, I actually landed, just as I started moving into full-time self-employment, I landed a 12-month contract as a BMS contractor, basically, BMS engineer. This was quite flexible, so it worked out quite well. It was flexible and it was just day rate stuff for 12-month contract. So I was a full-time contractor Monday to Friday, but because it was flexible, I was able to sometimes maybe just do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for them, and then as I was previously do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, my own jobs. And again, my own jobs were really just day rate stuff. Maybe some small projects creeping in, but nothing major. A panel build here and there, perhaps. And this is where your money's starting to look good. I've got here, note, money equals good. And at this stage, I also started investing more in tools, more in equipment, and I got myself a van as well, so I could start delivering panels in a van rather than in my red Mondeo. I felt very embarrassed at the time driving around in a red Mondeo, because I didn't feel official, but before this point, I couldn't justify investing in a van. So you've got to just take it stage by stage and not get ahead of yourself. And when it's ready, it's ready. And I know it's image and the way you portray yourself does matter in business to a certain extent. But what I actually heard from a client that I got to know quite well, I said to him, I was honest with him, I was like, what was your opinion, me rocking up on site in a red Mondeo? And he said, I think it's good. You don't come across like a flash twat or flash bastard or whatever he said. So that made me feel a lot better about that. I thought I'd just share that just in case anyone's sort of in a similar position and perhaps might feel the same way. Okay, so on to step 5 now, and this is where I set up a limited business. I don't have a team or anything at this stage. I would class this as business owner rather than self-employed contractor. You could split hairs with me here, but anyway, limited company, solo. And I did this at the age of 34. I'm now 36 next month. Yeah, so I set up my business about 2 years ago, and I didn't continue that 12-month contract anymore. And I went all in on my own thing and started focusing more on smaller project work now. So I was more focused on project work than day rate. And I still did, day rate stuff here and there, because you still got to sort of take what you can get at the early stages, and you're trying to build up that pot that you can, reallocate and reinvest. But I was starting to get other contractors involved and subbing out things with them, like install work, for example. Like all installation work that I do on projects, I sub out to electrical contractors generally, and sometimes sub out the control panel build as well. But all the rest of it, like managing jobs, managing projects, I was doing that, doing design work, doing commissioning, programming, etc. And I've wrote here, I was only doing the work that I wanted to do, which is, I would say, 90% true. Obviously, there's still a bit of you feel like you've got to take what comes your way. But again, when you've got a pot of money, you don't have to start just taking every opportunity. You can start picking and choosing what work you want to do. So I'm getting more freedom here, more control. But at this stage, you're starting to work more. So now I'm doing basically Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, at least half a day Saturday, or bits scattered across the weekend. But the money I've put here, better. So money's getting better at this stage. And then moving on to step 5. So this is where I'm at the moment, and limited business or limited company with team members. So I took on my first team member about a year ago, and just recently this month, there's now 3 of us, so I've taken on another team member, which I'm very excited about. At this stage now, I'm running a slightly different business to what I set out. I'm still in the industry, I'm still taking on some projects, but it's a bit different. But keeping in the context of the business that I started out with, let's just stick with that for now. So, at this stage, I'm 36 basically, and this is kind of where it scales from here really. So this is kind of like, not the end point, but the end point in terms of like going from employee to business owner. Because now we're at business owner, then it's scale ultimately. And at this stage, I started focusing on larger project work, and I wouldn't be interested in day rate work. It's just not worth it. There's not enough margin in it, So the controls and automation business, like I want project work. Bigger project, the better. Because ultimately, once you've built the skill set, it's the same thing, whether it's a small project, like a little mini panel, or a very large project with multiple panels. It's just more of the same thing, but it's exactly the same process. So I want to start scaling the business. So I want to take on larger projects, and I don't have to take on just day rate work anymore, because I've built up a big enough pot of money to be okay for a while. Now, obviously, if I got no project work for 6 months, I'd start worrying and probably have to start taking on day rate work. But hopefully you get my point. Now, at this stage, I'm not here with the business that I'm running now, because it's a different business. But rather than like on the previous stage where we were subbing things out to contractors and obviously having to pay them higher day rate work because they're contractors, now we're bringing in team members, and those team members are taking on the roles that we were using those contractors for. So we might start building up an installation team, might start building up a panel wireman, and it, obviously it grows from there, different roles, depending on what the needs of the businesses that you're running are. And in terms of like money, I put great. So this is where like money should be looking good. Like the whole reason you set out on this path, or for me at least, was to have like more time, freedom, control, and money buys us that, And we're still working sort of similar hours, Monday, Saturday, doing bits on weekends and stuff, but it's work that we're choosing to do. We don't necessarily have to do that. We're not going to go under if we stop working on a weekend, bits here and bits there. And if we want to take a day off, when we want to, you know, that's totally fine. And as I said at the start, like from here onwards, now it's just about scale. So more team members, bigger premises or more premises, maybe we're out for global domination perhaps. So it's ultimately scale from here on out. And that's it, guys. If you took any value from this, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. It would be much appreciated. See you on the next one.